Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donna Newbury, and on behalf of the entire team at Wellbeing Australia, welcome to the First Responder Wellbeing Summit. We're extremely excited about the summit because it's been designed by the first responder community for you, our first responders and your loved ones. For those of you who aren't familiar with Wellbeing Australia, we're a member-funded and national not-for-profit, which means that we're not aligned to any government, any agency, and certainly don't have any ulterior agenda with regard to the messaging. Our simple fact of why we exist as Wellbeing Australia is that we have a passion for empowering people to take responsibility for their own well-being. And more importantly, I think, is especially as first responders, we really encourage you to be proactive and find solutions to the challenges you face and in managing your well-being for the long term. This summit's also about supporting individuals across the first responder community in improving your well-being through living well, which is largely due to connection, community, and hope, which are key themes for this year's summit. So before I start and introduce our panel speakers today, it's important to mention that any comments that you add in the Q&A section will remain anonymous and will be seen by the panel. However, so if you have any questions, please pose those to the panel through the Q&A section. However, if you make any comments in the chat box, those will be visible to everybody on the webinar today. Excellent. So without further ado, I'm really honored to introduce our three panelists for this afternoon. Firstly, the Reverend David Riethmuller, who's Principal Chaplain for the New South Wales Police Force. Reverend Gayl Mills, Principal Chaplain for the Australian Federal Police. And Reverend Paul McFarlane, Senior Chaplain with New South Wales Ambulance. Welcome to all of you. We are absolutely thrilled to have you join us today, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts on the very important aspect of spirituality in well-being. Excellent. So without further ado, what I'll do is hand over to you first, David. You've worked in many places and engaged with many people. How do you see spirituality and faith in integrating with well-being in your experience?
Thank you so much, Donna. Really do appreciate the introduction. And I've had the opportunity to work in actually work in every continent in the world, except I haven't been to Antarctica, I've got to admit that. But one of the most challenging times of my life was working for 8 years in South America. I initially spent 5 years working in the Amazonian jungles and the high Andes on local community development and infrastructure projects. And it was during a time of war and conflict. It was a violent and dangerous environment, and I can truthfully say that one's long-term survival prospects weren't great, unfortunately. As you can imagine, it was a massive learning experience. I learned about people, and I actually learned a lot about myself. Every day posed new challenges for my family and myself, and amidst the trauma and pain of a society that was simply trying to stay alive, I found that the people around me were asking some big life questions. And in fact, I was doing exactly the same, asking questions that I think I was being challenged about. In reality, I think I was actually exploring my own spirituality. After 5 years, local circumstances resulted in my having to leave the country and re-establish myself and my family in a neighbouring country. I ended up as a chaplain in that nation's prison system, a chaplain to prisoners who were international, multicultural, and interfaith. Some were notoriously famous and some were just stupid kids who'd made bad decisions. And in that environment, I saw the true value of spiritual support. Chaplains have had a long history in supporting people who are in the military, the police, and many other first response agencies and organisations. The role of chaplains is to provide pastoral support and care to our personnel and walk next to them on their life journey. And when I enter a police station, it's not unusual to hear a police officer state, "Padre, I'm not religious." However, my response is always the same. But you are spiritual, and you have a spirituality that is exclusively yours. Having worked around the world and met a lot of people, only some of those people are religious. However, absolutely every one of those people are spiritual. And so spirituality is my common ground when I engage with people. Engaging with people on their terms opens opportunities to form trust, and trust is a key foundation for the development of a wellbeing strategy. Respecting people's spirituality is an essential aspect of chaplaincy support. Now, a person may hold a faith that may be understood through organised religion or an established faith, yet another person may reject organised religion, yet hold a spirituality that is at the very core of their lives. Some people may recognise this and explore it, while others may not fully engage with it until circumstances or life events create a series of challenges that results in a deep self-exploration. And my experience of self-introspection in war-torn South America brought about, I suppose, a spiritual crisis for me that I needed to explore. And the role of chaplains is to walk the journey next to others, providing assistance, particularly during life's challenging events. And I know that Paul McFarlane from New South Wales Ambulance will be exploring further the issue of provision of pastoral care amidst personal trauma, particularly from an ambulance perspective. So with faith and spirituality at the very core of people's worldviews, it is essential that people are provided with a safe and respectful environment where they can explore the spiritual perspective. And chaplains spend much of their time making connections with people and building trust and confidence. As you can imagine, this is a key aspect for a holistic approach to well-being. Often we have programs that encourage healthy lifestyles that address physical health, and psychological support programs that address mental health. Yet if we fail to address spiritual health, which is a key aspect of complete care and well-being. With the influx of new immigrants into Australia, particularly over the last 50 years, our society's become multicultural and multi-faith. The New South Wales Police Force has employees and police officers from a wide range of ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and as such, our chaplaincy team reflects a similar diversity. It is an interfaith chaplaincy that's able to support and care for our people, irrespective of their culture or their faith heritage. Gayl from Australian Federal Police will speak a little, maybe I'm looking forward to hearing her discuss the issues and the challenges of interfaith spiritual support in our organisations. I'd encourage you to consider your personnel, if you have oversight for a larger group of people who are in your organisation, or even a small team, but understand their spiritual needs and build a program that ensures positive, supportive and respectful circumstances and an environment. Such a well-constructed program will have tremendous long-term benefits for personnel and for their well-being. It'll create a resilience in your people, and when life's challenges and traumas take their toll, and it happens to us all, that they've got some tools to fall back on. They've got a support network of physical, emotional, and spiritual as well that will support them. So hopefully that was some of my experience working in a wider group. There's one thing I've found that people have in common. They may have different languages and different lifestyles, but everybody holds a spirituality. Thanks, Donnie.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Really appreciate that, David. Wonderful. Well, given us lots of food for thought, and I think you're so right. The spiritual aspect is so often overlooked, but such a critical part of people's identity, regardless of what faith, or even if you have a faith. All right, Paul, one for you here. So as the senior chaplain for New South Wales Ambulance, clearly your role is very complex, not just caring for your organization's people, but also for patients and their families in very difficult situations. How do you and your team support the well-being of first responders?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. It's great to be here, and it's great to have so many people online for this session. And I'm excited so many people are keen to hear more about spiritual care and pastoral care in a first responder context. Perhaps for those that aren't that familiar with what we do, I thought I might just go through a little bit of an overview of how we provide spiritual care in our context, which might explain it a little bit more to you. But basically for us, it's all about building long-term trusted relationships with our staff and our volunteers, and fostering genuine connection and community in our workplace. And so as ambulance chaplains, we wear the same uniform as our frontline paramedics. We work alongside them, we journey with them. And when things are going well or not so well, we are the ones that often they sit with and talk and have a coffee with and communicate with. And as David's raised, that idea of holistic care is really important. And we try to be quite holistic in our approach to staff as well. It's not just about their work environment, it's also about their families. We like to celebrate the milestones of life, as well as hearing about the sad times and journeying with them through the struggles and the ups and downs that they go through. And so organisationally, we've got quite a large program, and we try to make sure we have touch points with our staff all the way through the employee and volunteer journey. So from the time they start in their journey as a paramedic, we have a chaplain that works in the education area that gets to know them on day one and introduces himself to them. And all the way through their training, they're seeing chaplains around the college as they're doing their learning and studies. When they get into the workplace, most of our stations and workplaces have chaplains attached as well. So there's a real person they can get to know with a real name and a real life story and a real interest in their background and their family and their history as well. And we also make sure our specialist areas like our 000 call takers, our dispatchers, our helicopter crews, our aircraft crews, our corporate crews, our headquarters crews also have access to spiritual care as well. It's not just for the uniformed first responders, but for everybody. And recently we've extended our care into that legacy space as well. Excuse me. So we now provide care to officers when they leave the organisation, and also to their families as they get into retirement or move into other spheres of work as well. And so that provides an opportunity for pastoral care as they age and maybe need some hospital visits. And for some, of course, we do their funerals for them as well. So it's a real sort of beginning to the end journey that we have with our staff, which is a really nice way to have a program. It's not just for one person or one stage of your career. It's actually for everybody all through your career, which is a really important thing. And it's normal for people to see chaplains on a fairly regular basis and to have friendly and supportive conversations. You know, the sort of how's your weekend, how's your family, how you've been travelling, those sort of conversations around the workplace are really foundational ones to build rapport and trust and friendship, and just a real sense of getting to know each other as well. And so they see us as part of the team. We're outside the normal command structure, so we're safe to talk to. No one's going to dob you into the manager for having a conversation with the chaplain. It's not going to be on your record. It's very confidential, and that's a really important thing in terms of building trust with people. So they know they can have a one-on-one with us or chat in a small group, and whatever they talk about is always confidential. So that's a good process for us to provide that spiritual and pastoral care. But of course, as David suggested, we are part of a holistic program too. We work very closely with our peer support, our psychologists and others, to make sure people are getting a really good continuity of care and step care as well. If they need that additional mental health support, we always have people available that we can refer them to and plug them into, so they get that additional care that they need. And I like to think of it as a chaplain is often one of the first support people they see alongside our peer support officers in the workplace. And so we're like a doorway that opens up for people. And as they walk through that doorway of friendship and relationships, it opens up all sorts of opportunities for well-being, for extra support, for referral pathways and things. So, they come to us, and we may not have all the answers for them or the support, exactly the skills they need, but we'll connect them with the people that can provide that for them. And that's a really key part of what we do. And New South Wales Ambulance, I think we're considered some of the best people to help explore meaning and purpose in some of the roles that they have. So that calling of being a first responder that we talk about sometimes, that family that we talk about, the first responder family, they're very relational things. They're very meaningful things. They're very statements full of purpose and hope and future as well. And so we are people that can explore stories and reasons and purpose. And when we come across some of the awful things we do as frontline first responders, the chaplains are often well placed to have a conversation about what that means, how you process that, how you understand that in terms of your own role and your own experience of life as well. And, you know, often we get called out to situations where there's been a death of a child or a particular tragic, traumatic event. And that can often be accompanied by a lot of questions for people, such as, you know, why did that happen? They were a good family. That was only a child. That's not fair. They're real and genuine questions we come across as first responders. And whilst I'll say that the chaplains don't have all the answers, what we do have is the ability to think these things through, to talk them through, and to steer people to further kind of reflection and thinking about this if they want to go further in that thinking. So it is good to have someone in the organisation that you can sit down with and say, that's not fair, that hurts, I hate that, I'm angry about that. And there's no judgment. It's just part of being a first responder that we have to have those thoughts occasionally. We wrestle with those thoughts. And so chaplains are safe people to have that. And I think too, you know, we're touching a little bit on the faith side of it as well. We're all, we come from a faith background as chaplains. And as David said, different faiths are represented in our chaplaincy programs. I've got Christian, Jewish and Islamic in my team. So that represents a number of our facets of our workforce there. But of course, we have many people that claim a strong faith as well, and whether it's Christian or Jewish or Islamic. And so having faith practitioners in the workplace is valuable to them to explore their own specific issues around their faith and the way it plays out in the workplace. And I remember I've spoken to Muslim staff that were wrestling with how to do their prayers on a busy station where they're getting the phone rings. And so I was able to connect them with a Muslim chaplain to give them some guidance there from their faith about how to be a Islamic chaplain in a workplace where you're called all the time to leave and go and help people. And so those things are really important questions that first responder chaplains can actually help the organisation to address with their staff. But I also think just at a more existential level, I think what we do is we can have that faith discussion with any staff member, and there's times where we can remind people on behalf of a living and loving God that they're not alone in those situations, that there is still a God that cares for them, there's still a God that cares for the people that they're out there supporting. And even though it doesn't look like it on the surface, there is hope and there is future in that as we move through it, and as we look to sort of go through these tough times that we do as individuals and as a group and as a society sometimes. And so for a lot of people, that's a really important conversation to have. And it's a really important touch point on the area of hope, because often things look hopeless to our people because of what they're seeing. But a chaplain represents peace and hope and a future in the midst of that. And having us around is often a very tangible touch point for people. And I think too, most people are searching for hope when things are grim. And faith-based spiritual care allows us to just really work through that and when things are tough. Now, you know, the last 12, 18 months, just to finish this question, I think, Donnie, have been really tough for everyone, stretched people quite a lot. Remembering the fires, of course, and a number of my paramedics lost homes. We deployed chaplains into the fire zones to get alongside them, provide practical care, an arm around them to provide physical care, spiritual care as well, and that was really appreciated. And of course, the COVID pandemic has pushed us to the limits, and it's the first time I've ever seen in my career where paramedics have been fearful of taking home something from work and giving it to their families. So it was a genuine existential fear that they would actually infect their aging parents or their children or their partners. And people were genuinely scared. And so they needed people to talk that through. And the chaplains are often sought out to have that conversation about how do they keep turning up at work and caring for people when they're so scared themselves. And so that was a really important conversation to have. And I think to finish with, I think spiritual and pastoral care in the workplace has never been more important than it is at the moment. We are reaping the benefits here at New South Wales Ambulance of having quite a mature program. And so people are seeing the benefit of that now when the rubber hits the road. And I suppose I'd commend all first responder agencies to really make sure you've got a robust spiritual care program in place, because you just never know when your organisation is going to need to dip into that extra area of well-being. So I think that's probably what I'd say for that first one.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Paul. Really appreciate your perspectives and the unique position, I think, very often the ambulance first responders are in dealing with some of the issues you spoke about. So lovely to know that they've got such incredible support, regardless of their faith. And I think sometimes in the absence of faith, it still seems to give such a strong sense of compassion to people and comfort. All right, well, Let's move on to Gayl now, if we can. So Gayl, welcome. Lovely to have you with us today. Would be really interested to understand how chaplains, who are mainly of Christian faith, engage with people of different faiths, or people without a defined faith.
I think that this is something that our Australian society is dealing with very generally, in how do we live together and care for each other. I think, as you say, the predominant number of chaplains in all institutions are Christian, but I think that interfaith chaplaincy or faith chaplaincy to other groups, I think it actually has a lot to do with hospitality. God is extraordinarily generous and hospitable to us all, and we can really only offer a shadow of that. But I think actually walking a journey with someone and being with them in all of where they are at the moment, meeting them where they're at and being prepared to accept that and sit with that and be with them in that time is a sense of being hospitable to people and welcoming them in, so that they feel that they are welcomed and accepted and listened to. And I think, what Paul and David have both said, both feed into this a lot. Most people, I think, too, are deeply spiritual. Most of the time, I find I'm dealing with people who would say they're of non-faith. And I often say to them, yes, but I believe you're probably a very deeply spiritual person. And most people would agree with that. I think people live out their spirituality in ways that best express how they feel about that spirituality. For some people, it's being in nature. For some people, it's out in doing things. I think in a lot of first responders live out their spirituality by the actual fact that they're doing first responding work. They want to make a difference. They want to make a change. They want everything to be better for everybody. So they actually live out that spirituality in that way. So I think people who will say they're of no faith, often I think they're talking about being that they're not interested in the institutional church or religiosity of a particular brand of the institutional church for whatever reason. And they actually sort of then say, oh, I have no faith, because often they've been told that you have to take the whole thing lock, stock and barrel, box and dice, and they're not sure how to exempt themselves from that other than to say, no, I don't want anything to do with it. And I think that hospitality to people of other faith groups and of declaring no faith group means that once you make sure that people know that you're trying to be accepting and welcoming and that you're not placing any judgments on them, then they relax and feel comfortable, as if when we are invited into somebody's home and we know that they're very pleased we're there, then we relax and we enjoy their hospitality. I think I have some little cards that I give out, and they're just the same size as a business card, so they will go into a wallet. And it's got it's a picture of a little statue that I believe is in a German museum. And it's a little girl with her hand in a palm. And it's got a quote from Isaiah on it that says, "I will not forget you. I have held you in the palm of my hand." And I give those out. I've given out thousands over the 16 years I've been with the AFP. And I'm often surprised. I'll say to somebody, have I ever given you one of those? And this crusty old sergeant will bring out his wallet and this little card that's a bit weather beaten now, and it's kept that. Or people will say, oh, I've got one of those on my desk. So that actually people like that reassurance that they are still cherished, that there is hope in that. I think with dealing with people with other faith groups that, we all have our own journey in our faith as they do. And so whilst we're not being asked to give up any of our belief system, we can't be, it's not hospitable, not okay to be asking other people to give up any of their faith practices or rituals. But if we aren't able to join in with them, then we can at least provide a space and a place where that's okay for them. We've got a small prayer room in our headquarters. We've got, I think, 2 practicing Muslims in our headquarters who like to use the prayer room. And so I've had great conversations with one of them. He's a wonderful man, and we've had lots of conversations on faith and journeying with faith. And yeah, he's very comfortable with it being a multi-faith room. We just worked out which way was east for him, and then we just make sure he's not upset with the cross being in the room or anything. He just can't be looking at that when he's praying. So we've worked that out. In the recruits that go through, we don't have a lot of people of other faith groups come through, but it's been interesting to me that the young Muslim recruits we've had are probably the most frequent visitors I have to come and have a chat and talk to me, which is very interesting. And they're more than happy to for me to pray with them. Most people that come to visit me, I will say to them, can I pray for you before you go? And I think in 16 years, I've had about 6 people say no of all the people I've ever seen. But they're more than happy to come and chat to me, talk to me about it. Got a little pocket-sized Quran they can use to, if they want to make an oath, instead of a little pocket-sized Bible that they can get from me. Yeah, so I think it's that when people recognise that you are not judging them in some way and saying, well, you're not doing it right, then they're much more likely to become connected with you. Because I think what we've been saying about connection and community, that is ultimately, chaplaincy is a journey walking with people. We don't have clients, we have relationships. So we have we walk with people for a while. Some people we see, relatively often. Some people we see every couple of years. Some people you might only see once. But in our chaplaincy at the moment, we've got a very small chaplaincy. We've got, there's only just 4 of us at the moment, 2 part-timers and 2 full-timers, and one's in Perth and one's in Brisbane, 2 of us in Canberra. And but we are trying to onboard a young woman. When I say young, she's late 30s, which is young for me, young to me. And she's actually of Muslim origin. And she's been coming to see me for about 6 years. She's not in the AFP. I suppose I've been a bit of a mentor mother figure to her, and we just clicked instantly. And I can remember thinking when she first came, she would make a wonderful chaplain. She has an amazing pastoral heart. And so the process is being very slow in onboarding her. But she is not overtly a Muslim at this stage, but she is a pastoral person who wants to tell people that, one, God is okay and there for them, but also to be there trying to help people, to make a difference, to change. And I think she's going to be a tremendous asset to our team. So I think if we manage to get her on board, we might be the first ones to actually have somebody of Muslim roots as a paid chaplain. So yeah, so that's me for the moment.
Excellent, Gayl. Well, thank you so much. Some really interesting thoughts there. We've got some great questions coming through on the Q&A as well, so I hope we can get to them all. But it would be interesting to hear from you, David, how this comes to life. So what Gayl's been speaking about is that sense of care within, and pastoral care and spiritual care, where it's not specifically linked to a faith. So we'd love to hear how, some practical examples of how you deal with spiritual care in a non-defined faith environment.
Absolutely. And quite often when people create their own spirituality, they will take aspects from many faiths and pull these together as in their own expression. For example, the New South Wales Police Force held a series of wellbeing presentations for its employees. At these presentations, I presented on the subject of understanding grief and loss. Following the presentation, I arranged for one of our honorary chaplains from the New South Wales Police Force, a Buddhist priest, to lead a workshop on meditation for personal wellbeing. And it amazed me how many people remained after my presentation for the meditation workshop. This type of thing, there's clear strengths that multi-faith organisations or different faiths offer. The faith of the aspect of ceremony and tradition, which is very strong for the Buddhist, for the Jewish faith. The practice of regular prayer, which the Islamic faith undertakes, is again something that we can all learn from, and we can pull together various aspects. So that good example of providing a multifaceted approach to well-being and spirituality ensures that people are given options and they can engage at a level that suits themselves. I recently presided at a police funeral where the family specifically stated that they were people, and the deceased member were of no faith, and that the funeral service, they were quite clear, was not to be religious. As you can imagine, negotiating such ground as a Christian minister is fraught with danger. Nevertheless, I was able to present a service that respected spirituality rather than a defined faith. It certainly encompassed prayers and blessings, yet it respected the family's loss, celebrated a spiritual life that found that spirituality in the Australian bush. The officer was a keen bushwalker and keenly engaged with her own spirituality out in the bush. The family later remarked that they found the funeral service truly hit the mark regarding where they were at and their spirituality, and they acknowledged that the service respected their family member. So it is certainly not about this is what we've got to offer as far as spiritual well-being and spiritual care. It's, as Gayl said quite clearly, it's the role of the chaplain is not to impose our faith, but actually walk the journey next to people. And that's a very, very clear, and there's a couple of examples of engaging with people where they are at and making spiritual offerings where they can relate to.
Excellent. Thanks so much, David. Some great practical examples there. Great. Well, Paul, let's go back to you for a moment. So often, much of the pastoral care you and your team deliver is in such high trauma situations. So what are the ways that your chaplains care for the victims of trauma? And can you just touch maybe on the issue of self-care for both victims as well as the first responders?
Yeah, thanks, Donnie. I think as you mentioned earlier, our team's quite busy because we have a dual role of both supporting our paramedics and first responders and our workforce and volunteers, but also we can be called upon to support community members in trauma as well. So it makes us quite, I suppose, a versatile support program because we work alongside our responders and we support them and those that they're caring for as well. this morning, of course, I set aside some time to brush up on my talk, get ready for today. And of course, as a first responder, you never know when the phone's going to ring or what's going to happen. And my phone has not stopped ringing all day today with requests for chaplains around New South Wales to be available to our staff and our community. And I've had 3 specific incidences where that's happened today, and I'll just really recount them briefly to you. We had one where, interestingly, a chaplain was having coffee with their crews this morning and catching up, like I said earlier, about the importance of relationships. And the phone rang, and there was a tragic motor vehicle collision, which the crews quickly responded to. Unfortunately, a person died in that. And on the way back, the crews were wanting that particular chaplain to be available at the station for them so that they could talk about what they just experienced. So it comes out of a relationship, and the first thought of their mind was now's time to talk to the chaplain and process what we've just experienced. So I was really thankful that A, I had a chaplain there, and B, that chaplain was already well enmeshed with that team and at the forefront of their mind on such a tragic day for our first responders. But I've had 2 other calls today, one for a suicide of a younger person and one for an older person that died of a sudden cardiac arrest at home. And both of them, when our crews arrived, there was a palpable sense of tragedy amongst the family members that were there, and it was quite heightened emotions. And so our control centre rang and said, can we have a chaplain at both of those scenes to work alongside our responders to take the edge off that emotion and to be there and provide spiritual and pastoral care to the family on behalf of New South Wales Ambulance while we're on scene. And of course, often that turns into a conversation with the first responders back at the station afterwards about how they felt about it and what it was like for them to be there and how they felt quite confronted by it. I've been doing this job for a long time, and I can tell you there's often a palpable sense of relief when a chaplain turns up at a job like that. You often hear the, "Oh, thank God you're here, Paul," sort of conversation that comes up, because they know we bring a different toolbox. We wear the same uniform. We're not the medics. We are the spiritual carers and the pastoral carers. And so they know that the family's got the best care possible when we turn up, in addition to the clinical care that's already been provided as best we can. And so it's a very powerful model that I think we use. And it also builds confidence for the paramedics too, because when they see us in the field working in those very challenging situations and staying relatively calm and relatively in control ourselves, and being able to offer something to people who are going through one of the worst days, if not the worst day of their life, then it builds trust within the team, and they think to themselves, okay, there's something that they have that I think I could tap into as well. And so it often encourages conversations down the track with that chaplain about their own personal journey or their own feelings about an event like that or similar ones in the past. And so showing competency in a first responder organisation as carers ourselves, as professionals ourselves, actually helps build trust and build relationships and confidence in that space. So that's a good thing. David was talking a little bit about and Gayl as well, about that interfaith work that we do. And I remember some years ago, there was quite a tragic event in a suburb of Sydney called Greenacre, where a car came through a school car park and crashed into a classroom. And I don't recall all the details, but I remember there's 2 or 3 kids that were unfortunately killed by that car in that event. It was horrendously tragic for the first responders to arrive there. And of course, anything in a school required, parents are everywhere, teachers are everywhere. It was very, very tragic. Parents weren't sure which children had died, whether theirs were alive. It was just palpable sadness. And I had a phone call saying, can you send some chaplains? And the funny thing was, I was at a chaplains conference and I had about 30 chaplains. I said, how many do you want? And I said, we'll start with 2. But we sent 2. I sent an Islamic chaplain and a Christian chaplain together. And I said, let's go and just see what you can do in that place. And I'll send backup if you need it. And so it was interesting. It was an Islamic school, public school, but an Islamic school. And so the Islamic imam on my team was able to really minister to the people there in his own language, in their own culture. And it was also very sad, but he was able to go in and actually pray prayers over those children, which was very meaningful to the mums and dads who lost their children that day, to know that a man of faith, a man of God was there to pray for their children on that day. And the other chaplain stayed outside, worked with our command team, worked with our first responders and police and others on scene, and the families that were outside. So it was quite a good partnership that we had. And the commander of that scene often talks about how valuable it was having the chaplains there that day to help them with that scene that they managed. And I'm very proud that, we can provide a service like that as an organisation, because I think it's it shows that as an organisation we are very mature, that we're able to think not just about the clinical, but also the spiritual, the psychological, the wellbeing side of what we do, and provide, and not just the clinician, but the carers in different aspects of life that people go through as well. And that's a really key thing. But I think it just touches on that self-care question, is an interesting one to finish with. I think one of the things that struck me was having a conversation with my Islamic chaplain afterwards, because it turned out that he knew some of those families that were there. They were part of his mosque. And so he found that very confronting, to go to somewhere where children or families he knew and cared about had been killed. And I remember saying to him that, for us as first responders, that is not uncommon to go to places where the people involved. And that's very difficult to process. But I often say, when we go to those situations, you are a friendly face for those that have just lost a loved one. And so you are a comfort and an anchor for them. But it's up to us to process those experiences later on and to work through the emotions that causes us. And so, we are there for them, and it's a great blessing to them to have us there, because we have that already pre-established connection. But it takes a bit more self-care afterwards to work that one through. And I think just a couple of tips from me, just on top of some of the things we've already said today, is I think for me it's about building on a foundation of wellbeing before you get to a job. So just doing those basics and getting them right, having good people you can talk to, safe people that you can reach out to, connections. We know that the people with the best mental health are often the ones with strong social connections and good support in the community and in their families and amongst their work colleagues. So that's really, really important to actually invest in that. Exercise, diet, sleep, they just roll off the tongue easily, but they're absolute foundations for good wellbeing. And so we need to work on those in our own personal lives, including as chaplains and as wellbeing people, whether you're a psychologist or a peer support officer. You need to work on those yourself, so you've got something in the tank to give to other people as well. And I think also, personally, I think having good relationships with a local GP or a doctor is important too. So you've got someone you can talk to if you're struggling. So they're things I actually advocate. It's not all about spiritual care or prayer or meditation or Bible reading or anything else. It's actually about the good building blocks of wellbeing that we all know are good for us. But when you add those other things in, like community, church, prayer, fellowship, spirituality, that actually buffers you even deeper still with further resilience when things get tough. I suppose I'd say, just encourage people to get to know their local chaplains in their first responder organisations. I hope many of you out there have chaplains you can access as you require them. Intentionally build relationships. Get to know them before you need them. Get to know them in the normal good times, and get to know each other and your families and your connections with each other. Same as with your peer support officer, same as with your local psychologist. Get to know them before you need them, so that you've got a basis for a relationship going forward. And I think most agencies, in my experience, are working really hard to make sure pastoral care and spiritual care is actually part of our first responder culture these days. And I'm really pleased to see that happening. And, Gayl and David, I'm sure, are more than happy to help anyone that's looking for some wisdom on how to keep putting that into the workplace and expanding what you're doing currently. But I think just as individuals, keep working on your own social connections, keep working on your supportive community, and don't lose hope, because there's always tomorrow in this job.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Paul. Really great comments and great suggestions, I think, for all of our first responders. David, we've got another question for you, but I want to go to Gayl first, please, because a specific questions come through that I think, Gayl, you're so well positioned to answer. So the question is really about how, as a chaplain, you respect someone's privacy and private life while still being able to deliver holistic care. You're on mute. There we go. We just seem to be having a little bit of a technical issue with Gayl. No, that's all right. Well, Gayl, we'll come back to you, Gayl. Let's go to David then, quickly. David, a question through for you. So your chaplains also obviously very regularly attend traumatic events daily and incidents, which must take a toll on them and their families. What are your thoughts about why the well-being of first responders is so particularly vulnerable?
I think that many people enter the world of first response with our frontline agencies simply because these people are naturally empathetic people. Gayl touched on this a moment ago when she said that that empathy is actually an expression of spirituality, and that's why first responders are very spiritual people. They truly want to make a positive difference in people's lives by helping them in times of trauma. So when people are trying to escape danger and trauma, there's a certain group of people who rush towards such scenes, willing and wanting to help and assist. And these people are truly noble people. Yet empathy carries a cost. Empathy comes about as a result of engaging with victims of trauma and taking on part of that trauma. I attended a police incident a couple of years ago that left me truly rattled. I needed to implement my self-care strategies very urgently. Unfortunately, the incident took its toll on the other attendees, the other officers, and for one, it was the final straw. That person has left our organisation, but I'm currently providing support and care for that officer. So attending such scenes carries a cost. Of course, if we personally had to describe the first responder that we'd come to our scene of personal trauma, most likely we would describe that person as being empathetic to our situation and circumstances. However, that responder ends up taking on some of that trauma with them. And this is called vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma can be costly if a well-being and a self-care strategy is not in place. To be effective, such a strategy must be holistic in its approach. It has to have aspects that Paul has mentioned, with the physical, the mental, but the spiritual as well. So I'd really encourage you to ensure that you include a spiritual health strategy in your own self-care plan or in the well-being plan for the people in your first response communities. But empathy carries a cost, and that's a difficult thing. But again, it's empathetic people who enter first response agencies.
That is so true, and I think makes it so much more important for first responders to have that care plan and to be very clear about what are the elements of their own very unique recipe for well-being. And as you've said, so different for different people based on how much social, psychological, physical, and spiritual, and the balance between those. So thank you. Very, very insightful comments, David. All right, Gayl, should we come back to you again? Let's see if so the question, just to remind you, is how to respect someone's privacy while still providing pastoral care.
Well, I think most chaplains are like the chaplains that in my team, we don't keep any notes or records on people, and we're not expected to let anybody know, particularly their team leader or their superintendent, that they have been to see us. So effectively, that is what they tell us is private. However, if they came to us and said they were thinking of killing themselves, or that they were hurting somebody else, or they were going to hurt somebody else, then that would no longer remain confidential, because that's too serious, and we would stay with the person. I tell the recruits, we'll stay with you and work with you till we can go and do something together about this. But if you don't want to stay with us in that situation, then we'll be going and telling somebody about it anyway. I think one of the things that's important and probably people worry about is that they do come and they see you, and they might tell you a whole lot of stuff that's very personal, and they don't want anybody else to know. And then when they see you again, and there might be a group of people, if it's the first time they've been to you and this hasn't happened to them before, they may actually be a bit anxious that you're going to say, oh, how's it going, in front of everybody. But I'm sure most chaplains, I usually just say to them, oh, hi, how are you? Just like everybody else, and give no indication to anybody that I've had some kind of a private talk with them, because that puts them in an awkward position. And if we didn't respect people's confidentiality, then nobody would really come to us, and you wouldn't blame them either. I did once, though, I sent an all staff out to somebody who had been to see me, or we were good mates, and I just wrote back, and they put out a thing about something, and I wrote back and said, oh, hi, how about we catch up for a coffee? But I pressed reply to all. So the CPO, the Chief Police Officer in ACT Policing, wrote back and said, did you know that you sent that to everyone? So I said, well, just as well I didn't say something like, gee, how's that rash going? Or something like that. Yeah, but just being very careful, remembering that people are very, it takes a lot of courage to go and talk to somebody. And so people are usually feeling very anxious about it.
Mm. Thank you. Thanks so much, Gayl. Appreciate that. Paul, one for you that's come through. How do you measure the effectiveness of your chaplaincy intervention? Really interesting question.
Yeah, it is. It's a really timely question too, Donnell, because I think there's a number of us having conversations at the moment about how do we provide that kind of feedback to our organisations as well as the broader community of the value of spiritual care, because I don't think we've been our own best friends in the past, and we haven't done a lot of research, and we haven't done a lot of studies and peer-reviewed type research. And so I think we're playing some catch-up here at this point, which is a shame. But there's some good people doing some work. And I know I've got two of my team who are actually studying PhDs at the moment, which is really exciting. And one of them is looking at the impact of moral injury on first responders and the role that spiritual care has on that. And it's going to be a really important piece of research, new research. A lot of that research has previously been done in the military context, but we're not quite the same as the military, but we overlap, of course. And the second one is looking at the perceived value of chaplaincy in an ambulance program. So that PhD is fascinating because this is the first time someone's actually sat down and talked to first responders and paramedics and says, why do you use chaplains? Why do you seek a chaplain out for your own wellbeing and care? And I know talking to that research chaplain, and they've said to me that almost everybody that put their hand up to be interviewed was someone that identified as being either agnostic or atheist or having no, defined religion, but were people that actually appreciated the care that was given. So I suppose I'll say watch this space, because in the next 12 months you'll start to see some really interesting papers being released from, at least from my team to begin with, who are researching this at a high academic level as PhD students and with backing of secular universities to look at this seriously. I gave a talk at a university in Sweden last year, and they're keen on doing some collaboration in the future to look at their first responders and see they don't have chaplaincy in Sweden, so they want to introduce chaplaincy and see what difference it makes. So we're looking at things like, can we measure health and wellbeing before a chaplaincy is introduced to a station, and in 6-12 months down the track, what difference does it make, both with questions, qualitative and quantitative answers? So some really interesting work here. We don't have all the answers yet. I think most of us would say that our gut feeling and what we're hearing anecdotally is that people very much value what we're doing. When we do it in a really heartfelt, genuine and professional way, of course. Sometimes you get chaplains who are a bit old school or they don't really have the skills needed. But I think most of us are only engaging chaplains that have the highest quality, the highest professional standards to our teams so that we can bring the best care possible. So, yeah, I don't have a clear answer for that just yet, but I think watch this space. We're on a journey, and I'm really excited that we're going to be starting to produce some really good things soon. And that's going to be important as we move forward, because we want to be in partnership with peer support. We want to be in partnership with our psychologists who are a fair bit ahead of us in terms of that research base. But we're on the trajectory, and we're partners in this. We want to show the value of holistic care and the difference it makes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. All right, David, another one for you. And it's a two-part question, I think. The first is, where does hope fit into spiritual care? And the second part of that is, can a chaplain give hope without it being false hope? So is there such a thing as false hope? And how do you as a chaplain navigate that very fine line?
It was only this morning, somebody came into my office at headquarters and asked, is everything going to be okay in the set of circumstances that I've got? It's a little bit like the wounded person on the battlefield. You'll be okay. Well, the reality is we don't know how things are going to pan out. I think hope is not about giving false hope. I agree with the person who has raised that question. That particular issue is very, very important. False hope can actually do more damage than facing reality. What in chaplaincy support, it's about empowering people to make decisions and take positive decisions for their direction in life. And when circumstances are difficult and when there does not seem to be any good way out of a set of circumstances, the last thing you want to be going into this situation is offering false hope and saying everything's going to be fine when you know full well it won't. It's an easy throwaway line. Hope it's such a difficult term to pull together, but hope sees the bigger picture. When I attend a crime scene and it's certainly unpleasant, or if I'm speaking to an officer, I think the officer is expecting me to say what happened. But in fact, I never ask what. I ask, who is at home? Oh, I've got my partner and my children. Tell me about your partner and your children. And so it's a complete, their identity is not wrapped up with the uniform. Their identity is wrapped up in who they are, who the relationships they hold. Where is the hope that they have for their kids? What's the future with their partner? So hope is a much broader picture, and to be able to allow people to see the bigger picture and to see how their the fullness of their identity, which is often much, much greater than the uniform they wear. And hope is about understanding that they've seen a difficult situation, they are involved in a bad set of circumstances, and yet here, as Paul said, we turn up at these scenes and Paul says that amazing 5 words, thank God you are here. And whether we understand it, we do bring some hope, but it's about helping people see their circumstances as being much greater than the crisis that they're facing.
Great points. That's really rings true. So we've just got a couple of minutes left. If I can ask the last question to you quickly, Gayl, just to cover in 2 minutes that we've got in for you. It's a one about the, Paul had mentioned the shared elements of well-being. He sees as the holistic approach is needed. What's your view to integrated well-being?
I think that it's really essential. I think that all of the helping disciplines are very complementary to each other, whilst each one brings its own special element, so that we need to not be professionally jealous of each other, but to actually build on those strengths of how we can actually help the person the best by bringing the different dimensions that we all can offer to people, so that we can help them to be empowered, as David was saying, and how they can best find the solutions. That I believe most people have their own solutions to something, and I think that they need to be empowered to go through and work on those and go forward with those, so that they can be the best person that they want to be. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. What an inspiring set of presentations and discussions I think we've heard today. Really, really do appreciate your thoughts, your perspective. And, I think we speak so often about well-being, as we said earlier, without the spiritual and social aspects to it, but so often those two go hand in hand. And when you feel that you have a home spiritually with some people, they really do very often become part of your social group. So an important part of it, I think. Excellent. Well, just before I close, I just wanted to thank you, each and every one of you, for coming on today and sharing your experiences, your thoughts. And hopefully if people wanted to reach out to you, they could do so. For anybody on the audience, if you feel like you need support or anything that's been discussed today has upset you and you feel like you would need some support, we will be putting up a slide. We're just putting up that slide now, which can provide some contact details for you. As you log off this afternoon, you'll see a 2-minute survey. Please do take some time. That's an anonymous survey, but we really appreciate that. We'd love some feedback to help inform our future wellbeing summits for first responders. So we really would appreciate if you could do that survey. It will come up straight after we disconnect. You unfortunately won't be able to get back to it. So if you can just take 2 minutes, that would be great. And lastly, thank you all for attending. We really, really do appreciate the energy, the questions that have come through, and the interest in this really important topic and part of wellbeing. And we look forward to seeing you all on our other interesting sessions this week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.